Welcome, everyone. And this is the third and, he says, final piece of Mark Kroening's presentation. And last week was just really such a vibrant, important conversation. And welcome back, Mark. So over to you. You're on, you are on. Mm-mm. No, you had it before.
How
There.
about that?
Yeah, perfect.
Sorry, I'm having a slight technical difficulty here with my computer, so just give me a moment. Let's see if I'm good there. I almost feel like saying talk amongst yourselves for a moment because my computer's not happy.
Uh-oh. Okay. We can see you and hear you, just so you know.
Okay. Okay, well, if that is the case, then I will plow on even though I'm not.
Are you
Okay.
not seeing us? Ooh,
No, I'll work with it. So I just pasted a bunch of stuff in there. This is mostly a recap of where we've been. So there's nothing new really here, other than my comment in towards the end, which is somewhat of a sense that in our last session we understandably we're in a rush to be tangible, and I think that that came at the what's the phrase to the detriment of some of the fundamental stuff. And so what I'm going to try and do in this session is introduce those 5 implications that I intended on introducing last week but didn't, and pose 2 questions, and then essentially get out of the way for a conversation amongst all of us. That's my hope. At the bottom of what I just put in the chat is the link to the framework that has been underpinning everything that I've been bringing, if anyone would like to open that or look at that again. And with that as a lead-in, in terms of today, this is in some ways the aspiration. So continuing to build the familiarity with the implications of the universal patterns of living systems, but really as we're all gathered here around the idea of regenerative economics, making it about that. And so in terms of the agenda, kind of what I was just pointing to, a very quick overview of 5 of many of the implications, and then I'll drop 2 questions in, and then I will look to see what people wish to either speak into or put into the chat, and off we'll go. I'm going to dump the 5 implications that I'm referring to in one go here, and then speak to them very briefly. And I understand this is potentially a lot to front load, but as I said, I kind of want to get out of the way. One of the implications of being guided by the universal patterns that support flourishing living systems is that the orientation of what we're doing must be towards life. That might sound really obvious, but I would simply draw the contrast that that is not the #1 orientation of our economics at the moment. So that is one thing that will have to be different moving forwards. Number 2, action informs, and Pam helped me workshop this sentence, action informs the next moment and systems change. And so this here is pulling on the specific requirements in the framework I've shared in leading to this implication. But what this is saying is it really matters what we're doing in this moment. And to the degree that we understand what this moment is, and that includes something that is in part 4, which I'll get to in a moment. Number 3, focus on development of consciousness and action taking. This is getting at the idea that our actions are influenced by the degree of consciousness or the amount of consciousness that we have. And so it's really important that we are building that moment by moment, so that our consciousness is becoming more sophisticated and our action taking is becoming more of the type that does bring about the systems change towards a regenerative future that we might be aspiring for together. Again, the specific requirements that speak to that are in brackets. Number 4 requires truth seeking. And this is basically saying we do need to know specifically who we are as a self. We do need to know enough specifically about the context that we're operating in. And we do need to know enough about the system fundamentals, aka the universal patterns of the system that we're a part of, so that the action taking we are taking is relevant and is going in the direction that we're aspiring for. And then number 5, admitting again that this is just blasting through very quickly. One of the things that the universal patterns of living systems also inform us is that action must be decentralized and autonomous. And one thing I will pull on here is that autonomy is required for development, which I talked about in number 3. And autonomy is also a feature of cognition, which we spent a bunch of time on last week. We spent a bit of time on number 5 last week, and so some of this won't be new. Okay, with that, the 2 questions that I promised, which are basically our questions that we were invoking together last time, putting them into the chat. What are the connections between these universal patterns and regenerative economics? And what do these universal patterns guide you specifically as a person to do in your work, in person, in place, and in time, so that you matter to the coming about of a future with such regenerative economics? So, with all of that as perhaps a whirlwind, it feels like a whirlwind to me. I don't know about you guys, I'm sure you'll tell me. Let's chat. Invitation is to raise your hand if you wish to ask a question or make a comment on any of what I just shared in terms of implications, but also the 2 questions that I listed, and or put something in the chat. So, please.
It is a bit to take in, so maybe everyone just when you're ready. Was it in this meeting last week that we talked about choice and cognition? And I think that that's what led me to suggest the word informs, action informs, because humans, theoretically anyway, live at choice, at constant choice, where we are informed by what's happened prior as we make our choice on what to do next.
Yeah, I think that's where all life sits, actually. That's sort of how it is. I found find the phrase truth seeking interesting because um for me there's a kind of an outside look in that perspective that somehow you're out of the system and understanding how it all works and then figuring it out. And I really feel this is more an inside job, and that the truth, such as it is really about figuring out the word that came up was a growing fit. Um, uh, uh, to always have a sensitivity to what is correct in this particular time and place, with an eye to how that can evolve, or with an openness to the evolving. And that's as close to truth as anybody can get.
I love that, truth such as it is.
But we like to have things fixed, and because everything has autonomy, it's not possible.
Mhm.
Once a truth is discovered between a set of living things, then everything around it gets to reorganize, and that creates a whole new body.
Mhm. Mhm.
And I think there's something about being open to the joy of that flux,
Mhm.
um, as opposed to trying to keep it fixed, that allows for the things to evolve in the moment, um, and for emergence. I think that's where emergence comes from.
Mhm. What is FOS, Gil? Gil is saying that uh,
And
there's
Full,
OTOO.
full of shit.
Okay.
well, there you go. So we don't need to spend
Trying to be
another minute
polite.
on that.
Trying to be polite. Yeah.
Uh,
But I think the important part of the do we have free will question is it maybe gets back to the truth point or something like that. I think there's a lot of situations where we claim autonomy or we explain our behaviors and our explanations to ourselves are not correct, right?
well,
And so
not really informed.
and so we like to think that we chose something for whatever good reasons, but in fact, there was some other set of reasons that dictated that decision and behavior. And I guess one of the reasons that matters to me is that it does seem like we're in systems, these systems are bumping up against each other. The systems make changes that we're inside of. We can pretend that we made a decision, but actually it was a systems decision, right? And anyway, so it looks a lot like you don't actually have free will.
Well, when you're in relationship and you want to maintain that relationship, then that sort of means there is a responsiveness that's outside of yourself as well. So that's not totally autonomous. You have to take into account that relationship and that impact on that relationship. So you're not unattached.
I mean, this is, for example, I think this notion that we decide whether we're going to be successful or not, right, by our own effort and studying and working hard and stuff like that. But if you step back and you look what the most important decision you made was what country you're born into, right? That's what determines the biggest part of your success is going to be what nationality.
Well,
Right.
okay, so
But we don't give that credit, right?
well, we're awakening to that reality, right? That it's a spectrum, that nothing is very little is absolute. So within the context of all of what I am conscious of, I then make the best choice I can. And yes, you're absolutely right. There's a ton of limitations by the system on what I feel my options are for choice. So I think it's a complicated answer to a complicated reality. It's not like, it's not, do we have free will or don't we? And that's been a stumbling block actually for me in understanding what choice, cognition, and creativity mean in the Fritjof Capra living systems way, is that trying to understand what that really means when they say everything is a choice, because I don't actually think that everything is a free will choice either. Mark.
Yeah, thanks for starting this thread, Pam. I guess I would like to offer a couple of comments and then perhaps draw us back to one of the questions, if I may. And just so it's not just so it is just so that it is explicit. My work in learning and framework is working from the understanding that there is not choice in the way that we tell a story that there is. It is saying, and so, you know, you may disagree with this point, but the framework captures the idea of determinism, which is saying that biologically, based on what a self is in the moment and the context that it is observing and responding in, that there really is only one response that biological organism will take moment by moment. And what because we don't necessarily experience it like that, we do have to acknowledge the fact that there is a psychological component to being a sophisticated organism like we are with a nervous system. And so we also simultaneously with that sort of biological interaction with the world, we have a psychological level and the ability to tell stories, both that influence what we do, but also are a story about what we did do. And all of that matters to the actual actions that we're taking. So I don't know, because we often all come to this with a different understanding of how this happens, and we have different levels of receptivity to potentially modifying or changing that. It's often a conversation that doesn't tend to go too many places. And so with that in mind, I'd like to note that we've introduced some important nuance about this particular idea and topic, and that I think is really helpful and important. I invite continuing to, you know, as individuals and as a group, to continue processing these ideas to the degree that it's helpful to our own development and learning, and therefore action taking. But if it's okay, I'd be interested in moving on a moment. And then just before I do draw us back to the question, I just want to take a little quick look at the chat here. Cool. I like what well, thank you, David and Miguel. So yeah, what I wonder, again, like this may not direct us in this direction, but I'll sort of try again. Given that this is sort of the intention of this space, although, you know, we can certainly use it for whatever we want to. But yeah, drawing us back to this question, what are the connections between these universal patterns that I've shared in the framework and regenerative economics? And drawing us that question for the purpose of learning and development of consciousness around these things, and ultimately to support our action taking, because as I think it was number 4 in the implication that I mentioned, it really does matter what the actions that we're taking are. If we do want to be moving towards a regenerative economics at some point in the future, and we want to matter to that movement, it does require us to be taking actions that matter to it, that are actually actions that some combination of getting us onto the path in which we're moving towards regenerative economics, or if we're on that path, advancing us along that path. So I'm going to pause and look at what was in the chat.
All right. Yeah. Fan asks a great question about the 16 universal patterns. And Fan, there is a link up above, a Google sheet where it's laid out. Yeah.
And I'm going to paste it in the chat again.
Okay. All righty. So what are the connections between the universal patterns and regenerative economics? Does somebody have a thought on that?
One of the things that comes to my mind on that is the sensitivity to the other and responding to that, which is inherent in what Mark put in, but which is not usually inherent in economics. There's always these things that don't quite fit and we ignore them. And if they don't fit the pattern, that's okay. It'll figure it out sooner or later. It's not our concern. Where this would seem to call that into question and into relationship.
I wonder though, because I think in nature, a big rock rolling down the hill does not take with sensitivity into consideration whatever that rock is rolling over. So I think that there is an aspect of economics, current economics, that is true to some of these universal ideas, and that's its staying power. And it all, speaking of power, you know, the biggest rock wins. And I do wonder if it would be helpful in regenerative economics to also consider, and Tanuja gave a presentation on that, what makes chocolate not natural, what makes cigarettes not natural. It's just an important, as you say, Mark, nuance, but I think important. Please.
Yeah. What is coming to mind here is, and again, this might be helpful, like if we want to use the word consciousness or awareness as a proxy for consciousness, when we think about a rock, when we think about a cell, when we think about a slime mold or a sponge or an elephant, a dog, a human, really notice that the amount of awareness that each of these things have is different. And what that means is, and especially once we get to sort of the higher organisms, where like the awareness is both of the world, but also the self, and also being aware of the awareness of the self and that recursive loop. And so because of that, it means that there is at least the ability to take in more of the world and have more of the world informing what the action taking is. And so tying this back to, I think the start of this item was around being able to consider the other in action taking. What we are sort of self-evidently learning as a species on this planet is that we thought we could take actions and not consider the other for a very long time. And for all intents and purposes, that was true.
Mhm.
Because the impact on others, the impact on the ecology that we're all participating in together was buffered by that, or certainly not to change particularly rapidly. But we are learning, we are becoming aware, both psychologically, but also materially, that that is not true, and that our actions moving forwards will need to become that considers the other, because if we don't, we will be hurting ourselves as an individual or as a group. And that by doing that to the degree that we're able to proactively is part of the bringing about of that future scenario where our action taking as individuals and groups, which we could encapsulate within this idea of economy or political economy, we can know something both about that future state and what it might look like, but we can also know, guided by the universal patterns of living systems, what we can be doing as individuals and groups more substantively that are changing contexts within this living world system that we're a part of, that is part of the movement of that system towards that future state where essentially the universal patterns of living systems are embodied in our consciousness and action taking, which is the developmental sort of path or step or series of steps that this work is inviting into the space of bringing about an economics that is the economics in a flourishing world, with humans living in full relationship with all of the living world system.
For me, the key words there are full relationship. We tend to shut off those relationships that are inconvenient. Pam, when you were talking, what came to mind was Mao and his drive to bring China out of the old world into the new, and totally disregarding so much of what gave life to the Chinese culture in that process. And it was maybe well-intentioned, but he really chose to eliminate a whole bunch of history and experience because it was messy and more difficult to bring into the future than just cutting it all off and trying to start over again. And I think that's the seduction that we're often faced with, the inconvenience of something that just doesn't quite fit. And so we just dismiss it to move on ahead instead of pausing to include it. And what the living systems approach would suggest for me is that we do slow down and begin to include and work to keep the harmony of all of that when we go forward, instead of thinking we can get rid of part of it so that we'll have something better at the other end, and that just won't exist. I think that illusion has been very seductive and responsible for a lot of the pain that we're in.
And Catherine, hearing that, I'm just wondering, are you necessarily talking that radical change is not necessarily recommended? Like, we still like really have this, interconnection between past and present and future. I really like your example of the Mao, because I'm from China. I never thought that way. So it feels wholesome. Yeah, thank you.
For me, that really speaks to a slowness. I mean, I'm all for radical change. I mean, good knows, going from separation to connection is a pretty radical change. There's nothing unradical about that. But the sensitivity still has to be, for me, to life. And that sensitivity provides a thread that will connect everything, as long as we hang on to it. And it provides surprises because you don't often know where that's actually going to lead. But if you're sensitive to it, then you will discover that in the process. But there's a slowness that has to happen to keep that sensitivity there. If you go too fast, you override that. And you know, I'm sure in life, because there's no one size fits all, that sometimes you have to go too fast and come back and repair it. That might be possible. But still, if you have that sensitivity, you'll know how to do that. You'll be aware of that. And it's that awareness, I think, we just shut things off to make it easy. And that's one of the big radical changes, is paying attention to that pain and staying with it instead of trying to get rid of it, but keeping it, holding it, so that you can nuance and finesse it to the point where it's not painful anymore and it suddenly blooms the way it should.
Yeah, slowing down is an excellent first step in the right direction. Just slowing down. They're back on Twitter in its heyday. I followed this guy who had 2 mules, and he moved at the pace of those mules. That was the fastest he went anywhere ever. And he drew quite a following because this idea of moving at the pace of our physical self rather than adding a mechanistic tool, right? Rather than adding a machine, to just move at the pace of our natural way in the world, it is quite enticing. It's until I need an emergency room visit for my 4-year-old, and as Gil is pointing out, and then all of a sudden speed is and that's, is that seduction? That feels like the wrong word in a way, because there's something so fundamental about wanting to save my 4-year-old's life when there's something available that can do that. It's a complicated.
I have to kind of think that if we held that service to life piece and the desire to move fast, that we would figure out a way to do that that doesn't destroy that. We've just not done that. We've chosen to eliminate that conversation from the process.
Yeah. It is.
I find this conversation about speed kind of interesting because, Pam, the guy you mentioned with the mules, I mean, now we're talking about physical speed. And I think when I think about this concept of slowing down, I don't necessarily think about physical speed. I think about the mental speed, the mind going and going and going and just trying to cover everything and getting so wrapped into everything that you can't be in a state of awareness, because the mind is moving so fast. It's just taking in so much, and not even taking in, it's just doing its thing of ruminating and going on and on and on. So I think for me, the slowing down is in the mind. It's slowing down within so that I can be more aware. And in that state, this physical speed can be responding to the conditions in the moment, whether that's running to the emergency room or just, allowing some time to go as slow as the mules, because, well, that's what you can do in the moment. So for me, the speed is more around our mental activity.
slowing the body down does help. You know,
It's a good metaphor, you know. I mean, you know, to do yoga, to meditate, you know, those kinds of things are slowing the body down as a metaphor for the mind. But, you know, in most of our day, you know, the mind is just going a million miles an hour, even if we're sitting still.
mhm, mhm, mhm. Yeah. Yeah. Carrying the metaphor of the emergency room forward, I believe that the emergency room is so full of cures and life-saving accoutrements because of the breakneck speed of competition and the drive of scientists and doctors, and the demand to excel constantly, which is a huge function of our economic system. That competition between pharmaceutical companies, between medical instrument companies, all of that all comes together in this glob of modernity.
And it's all external. I've been exposed to two artists. Gordon Wood is one, and Miquelon, and I'm not going to say his last name, is another. He's a Mayan guy. And both of them in their art express a drive. Yeah, the words want to say perfection, but that's not really what I mean. It's to be really in tune with their subject matter in a way that feels right to them, which is another definition of perfection, shall we say. But it's an internal conversation. It's an internal process. It's an internal validation. And the pharmaceutical and all that kind of stuff is external, has nothing in fact, it shortcuts the internal. You have to turn that off to actually be effective out there often, which is the problem, right? That's the whole dichotomy we're caught in, that we think we have to not be what we are, not do what we know we should because of all that stuff out there. And that's a false dichotomy. That's an illusion that we carry around to give us permission to not pay attention to who we are and what we really want.
Well, maybe it's an illusion we are taught by the system.
Yeah, well, we buy it. That's our choice too.
Yeah, for sure. But we may feel we don't have much choice.
Oh yeah. Yeah. Well, and that's the illusion of the system. That's what it's constantly telling you.
We're circling that same drain, Mark. It's very hard to break away from that, it seems. So so what can we do? I'm going to raise the second question. It's far back up here. Really far. What do the universal patterns or principles, as Gil is suggesting, guide you to do in your work, in your person, in place and in time, so that you matter to the coming about of a future with such regenerative economics? Thoughts?
Nikki, you've been awfully quiet.
I'm not completely tapped into the whole conversation because I just came from a collective imagination training. So I am collectively imagining right now. But yeah, I appreciate what everybody's saying. And I do interestingly, I am very curious how all of it falls into place. I was reading what Gil and Mark were talking about back and forth, and I do think first principles are really important in all of it. And so, how do we start grokking first principles in regeneration more? Like, how do we go there and go deeper into those first principles? And that's all I've got for you right now because I missed the first 30 minutes.
Thanks, Nikki. Dave.
You're welcome.
Yeah, I guess I was going in the chat a little bit where Gil and Mark were talking about principles versus patterns. Mark's proposed the universal patterns, and Gil was kind of asking for principles. And I actually maybe would make a distinction that the patterns are kind of a given and the principles are our reaction or something to those givens. And I do think, you know, there's a lot of things we need to internalize about our own behavior or our own being that then is reflected in our behavior. And I was wondering if we could come up with a few principles. One of the ones that comes to my mind is the, you know, kind of the traditional assume good intentions message, right? That there are patterns of behavior, the systems are created, people are doing things. I feel like very often we criticize the people who did things for being evil people. But I doubt that most of the time they're actually evil. They just did things that at this moment don't seem right to us, kind of. I'm holding aside the Supreme Court. They may actually be evil. But I, you know, and one of the examples I keep running into is kind of the Green Revolution and whether, you know, Norman Borlaug deliberately set out to destroy India or whether he did things that have turned out over several generations to have adverse effects on India. Then I kind of think he probably was kind of well-intentioned and he lived in his own bubble around how things worked. And the results then are this, you know, so I don't think it's particularly helpful to assume that he was evil because that then makes us different from the evil people, you know, somehow we all have that potential to create these problems, I think. And the question then is, how do you have self-awareness? So, you know, I offer that as a principle to go with the pattern, I guess. But I think there might be others that we could kind of, you know, say, you know, so when we're thinking slowly, we can kind of go through our principles and say, well, I'm going to do these things first before I react.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, principles and values too fits in there. Ingrid.
Hi, Zoom did an update and I was having a hard time finding where the raise hand button got hidden.
Yeah.
I love this discussion. Thank you all so much. And just thinking about the question that you posed most recently, kind of so what do we do about it? And I just started thinking about what I'm doing about it. I need to step out of this room. Oh, it's just as loud out here. Step into this room.
We cannot hear anything but your voice.
Oh, that's good. There's all kinds of background noise going on. Recognizing these principles in myself and making my choices with recognizing that I don't have to opt into the system, even if the system says that I do, that I can find ways to shift that in my own life, in my own being, and looking at how that belief that I have choice has impacted the way that I live and the outcomes that I'm generating, not just for myself, but for others. The meetings that I'm having on a daily basis, talking about amazing things like this, reinforces that. And just yesterday, I was meeting with a wonderful woman, Jamie, who's on the board of the Red Earth Descendants, which is a local nonprofit that is representative of our indigenous peoples here in Southern Oregon. And they're the ones who are going to be holding the conservation easement on this land where I live and working to make it so that this land legally owns itself and changing the systems, figuring out how to do all of this in ways that feel like they're in full circle and well-being economy, recognizing multi-capitals and just not going about it in a capitalist way.
Mhm.
at least not, strictly financial capital for growth's sake and profit for profit's sake. And it's working. And I think that that's the main thing that I would love to share with others is, oh, hey, look, we actually can shift this. We can opt out and make different choices. People often say, oh, well, I would if I could, but if I do that, then I can't actually get by and live the way that I want to live. Well, how do you want to live? Do you
That's
want to live? Yeah. Do you want to live with the newest, bestest, fastest toy all the time and chase the almighty dollar to get it? Is that what's fulfilling you? Is that what thriving means to you? If
Mhm.
that's what it is, then okay. But we're slaves in our own minds and we can change that. I'm not chasing the newest, best, fastest toy. I'm growing all my own food and trying to demonstrate how I am growing more food than I can eat. And I would love to share this food. I saw a beautiful sign at a church community room recently where they were doing a screening of an amazing documentary called Where the Olive Trees Weep, which is about the Israeli-Palestine conflict that's going on. It's beautiful, highly recommend. But there was this beautiful poster on the wall that said, if you have more than you can eat, build a longer table, not a higher wall.
Mm.
And I feel like that's what I'm working to do. And I feel like that's a big part of what we're working to do here in just having these conversations and figuring out how does that look for each of us.
Mhm.
So yeah, we're doing it. Thanks for having the conversation. I love you guys.
Thank you, Ingrid. Yes, I I too feel like I'm doing it. I don't hold profit or money making as the goal. I try to do good work towards a regenerative future and trust that that my needs are met. And it really is a matter of asking ourselves, how do I want to live? What is a quality life? And really questioning whether or not every new toy is needed in order to have a quality life. Thank you. Fan.
Wow, thank you so much for sharing. So last week I had such a special experience. I went to talk with the head of sustainable development in my institution. And I really want to do something very special, knowing that whatever I propose, including living system thinking, eco-social contract, may not get enough attraction or interesting from him, knowing his confinement in the larger multilateral organization. But what makes the meeting memorable, that I want to do it more often in different contexts, in different form, is that I was able to start with 1 minute land acknowledgement and a 5-element meditation. He was shocked, but then he couldn't say no because I was very soft. Could you allow me to start like this? And he never responded to my email afterwards, and which is fine. I feel it's just important to be authentic, be who we are, and maybe this seed we plant in each sincere actions, maybe they will not never reflect back in our lifespan, but nevertheless it provides a different reference point, different experience for them, that okay, there's a different expression about how people think about different things. And I really like, Catherine, you mentioned about how to combine, or just embody both, service to life and a desire to, go move fast. I think, that's just so, important. I'm still trying to understand what it means to be in my relationship, in my context. So thank you so much for always giving me so much inspiration, and also courage and hope, so I can be authentic in my environment with the people connect to me.
Thank you, Fan. And you are absolutely on the front lines. And it really, we stand with you 100%. Thank you for blowing that person's mind. And it is 8:59, so I just really want to announce quickly that Tanuja couldn't be here. She's taking a course at this time this month. And so, Dave, we're going to take the rest of July off because Tanuja's taking that course. I need some downtime myself, and we will be back on August 6th. So and hopefully with Brett Bart maybe our speaker that day, and he was a real hit when he was here before, and so make sure to watch for that. And Mark, do you have any final thoughts as we finish up this wonderful collection of conversations?
Yeah, thanks, Pam. Simply gratitude for everyone who has engaged and participated. We're learning together, and hopefully what I've offered is being useful.
Indeed,
I look
it
forward to continuing.
Indeed, it has. Thank you so very much. And you all, happy middle of the summer to everyone. Or if you're in a different time zone, whatever season you're in. See you guys in 3 weeks.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Stop the recording.